Hello and welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth. I feel the need to clarify a few things and also to comment on others that have been brought forward, issues that have been in the news that I just have not had time to comment on, and how they relate to recent videos that I've put up. First of all, what has been touted as an example of the excessive regulation issue, well, there are several issues that have been brought up in relation to the idea of excessive regulations and how these are being abused. And one is the raid on Gibson Guitar Company. Another is on the sale of raw milk. And the third is the raiding of lemonade stands and shutting them down. And how this is an example of excessive regulation, but I reject that notion. Now, certainly regulations are involved in these cases, okay? And I'm going to get to a little clarification on the idea of regulations in a moment. But what I see being played out in the Gibson Guitar case, the raw milk case, and the shutting down of lemonade stands, and for that matter, the feeding of the homeless in public parks in Florida, what I see is a further example of police state tactics. When you have a police state, it is common practice for that state to exert its power and authority over the populace by means of various bureaucracies. It is not always the police that come out in intimidating force. It is not always the police that is going to come into action to enforce the will of the police state. Oftentimes they will use other bureaucracies to do this. And that's what I see happening in this case. In the case of Gibson Guitar, in the case of the raw milk sellers, in the case of those who are trying to set up lemonade stands or other, instances of trying to sell something and feeding the homeless in public parks. These are ways for the state to exert their power and authority because we are in a police state right now. We're already in it. It's not coming, it's already here. Just like I've been telling you that we're already in World War III. It already started. Some of the other big players aren't yet on the game board. That does not change the fact that it's already here now. Okay? So, I don't see this as a regulation problem. Now, that said, and I shouldn't even have to explain this. I shouldn't even have to say this because it should be patently obvious to anybody who has even half of a fucking logic circuit in their brain that there are a lot of redundant and useless regulations. And some of them date back to 200 years ago that have never been taken off the books. Okay, so yeah, there is too much regulation in the sense that it is not codified properly, it is not checked for redundancy and checked for stupidity and for laws that don't have any value or meaning to us today. So in that sense, yes, there's too much regulation. But when it comes to regulating corporations, in my mind, you can't have too much because these companies will rape you to support the bottom line of their profit. And that is just a fact. Get over it. So, I also wanted to comment on a couple of other things that are also important for you to understand where I come from, okay? I'm not a Keynesian, okay? Not a supply sider. When you look back in history, you can see that Keynes failed. Supply side also failed, whatever you want to call whatever economic policies that have been put into place. When Reagan started the trickle-down supply-side bullshit that just further eroded the American workforce and the American industrial base. Okay. And it facilitated a greater transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the super rich, which we are seeing the final end results of now, because Obama has been put in place to see this through to the end, and that is by dismantling Social Security and Medicare and all of the other programs that have been extremely beneficial, cost very little. They have like a 1% overhead on each of them, and there is nothing in private business that can come even close to that. So anyway, Keynesian supply side, they failed because we can look at the record and we can see how it has failed. We can look at statistics, we can look at facts, we can see that they have been utter and complete failures, totally bankrupt, have done nothing to promote the middle class, to increase wages, to increase benefits, to do anything to help working people. All that it has done is enriched the super rich and taken everything away from the middle class and the poor and the working people in this country. Now, for all of you out there who still are in this idea that Austrian economics is somehow going to be the answer for you, and that's going to solve the problems of this country, you're fucking sick in the head. And I'm going to tell you why. Just instead of just spouting the crap that you're reading in a leaflet or a flyer for some candidate who shall not be named, why don't you go actually look up what fucking Austrian School economics is? And find out why they can lay claim to absolutely fucking nothing except failure themselves. Of course, they have a shield against this. And you know what that is? They eschew any kind of statistics or evidence of any kind of economic good or evil that would come out of their school of economics. So therefore, basically what Austrians say is, our system works because we say so. Trust us. Thank you. No, I don't trust you. And if you look in history, when Austrian school economic philosophy has been applied, it has been an utter and abject failure. And it will be again in the future. But you can't prove it to Austrians because they will reject any of the statistics that you give them or any of the evidence that you point to, because that's the nature of their economic system. It follows no logic. It just is what it is. So it's bullshit. It really is voodoo economics, if you remember that from Reagan's time. Austrian school economics really is voodoo. It relies on nothing that can be measured, so when it fails, they can just ignore it. And it won't succeed, so obviously that wouldn't have any effect either. So instead of spouting slogans and talking about things, why don't you actually go look at what is actually there and make up your own mind before you spout useless jargon and nonsense. Okay? The other piece of useless jargon and nonsense that I need to clarify on is the so-called idea of a free market. Okay? Now, who could be against free markets? Oh, it's just the free exchange of, goods and services between people. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, because what we have in this world today is we have tremendous imbalances. You understand? There are always going to be nations, companies, and individuals who have an advantage. Sometimes those advantages are absolute. I'll give you an example. You have China, okay? Now, they're going through a bit of trouble right now, okay? But they have a vast labor force. So, if they have jobs that pay slave wages, there is so many people in their labor pool that there likely are people who will work for that amount of money. Okay? So when you have a vast amount of people available, you have absolutely no incentive to raise your wages to a living wage. So I can also point to Indonesia, which is another really good example. People there are paid slave wages. Now, how can a company, let's say you have General Electric, let's say that they have a manufacturing plant in the United States and they have one in Indonesia. It's the same company, they make the same products. How do you support paying people in the United States a decent wage to our standard of living when you have the same worker in Indonesia making slave wages? Well, the answer is you can't. So what a free market, quote unquote, does is it forces everybody down to the lowest common denominator. And when I say I want to bring people up around the world, I want everybody to make a living wage. I want everybody to be able to survive. I want everybody to be able to afford all of the necessities of life by working a normal job. Not 80 or 90 hours a week at slave wages. I want that because it's something that is good for humanity and people. And if it means less profits for corporations, then so be it. Corporations have lived fat and happy for way too long. And the very first thing that they do whenever they run into economic problems is fire people. And it's never the top people, no. It's the people making the widgets. So they take everything out of the hide of their workers. And that's the way it would continue under a so-called free or freer market. It's a race to the bottom. And if we had a free market system put into place that took all of these regulations away against trade and all this other kind of stuff, you would be dealing with countries that have absolute advantages. And there would be no incentive to keep any jobs in this country. Everything would be outsourced out of this country. And somehow you think this is going to be better for you? And better for this country? Give me a fucking break. Free market it's a code word to a race to the bottom. And would all be slaves working for slave wages for the various corporate multinationals that would be made hugely bigger and hugely more bloated with money as a result of any kind of so-called free marketism. That's why regulation in that respect is absolutely vital and necessary. So, just some clarity there. Thank you. Good night.